Hi, it's Exploring John. We're going to make some maple syrup wine tonight. Stay with us and see how we make it. Here's some of our equipment we're going to show you. Here's our fermenter. There's a hydrometer and a thermometer, a glass gallon jug. There's our maple syrup, a funnel, a sterilizing container, and a pot on the stove. Okay, one of the first things we're going to do is take our sterilizer and put it in the sterilizing container. It's a one-step sterilizer. Now we'll add a gallon of water. As our jug fills up, we use 1 tablespoon for a gallon of water to make our sterilizing solution. Now we're pouring the water in. Now that we've made our solution, we're going to pour all the water in the fermenter so we can sterilize it. We'll take and wipe around the fermenter, get the sterilizing solution all over it. We've got a lid. We'll sterilize that too. Sterilizing the lid. Now while that's sitting there waiting for the sterilizer to take effect, we're going to fill up our gallon jug again so we can combine that with a jar of maple syrup. We've added the gallon of water to the pot. Now we're letting it warm up a little bit. And when it does, we'll add a quart of maple syrup to it. Okay, we opened up our jar. Now we're going to pour it in. There goes 1 quart of maple syrup. No pancakes for this. Okay, next for our mixture, we're going to add in some yeast nutrient. And we'll stir that in. Let it dissolve. We had some empty soda bottles that we filled with water and stuck in the freezer. So we added them to the mix here to help cool this off faster. Already it's down from about 130 to 90 degrees. Now we've seen our thermometer has gotten down to 75. We're going to go ahead and put it in the primary fermenter. Okay, we put the first pot in here in the primary. We've got the kettle or the pot with hot water in it. We're ready to dump another jar in. Watch this. Pours out real easy. A lot easier than honey. Hold it up here and try and get it all. So again, we add our teaspoon of yeast nutrient. That'll give the yeast something more to eat on as they're changing this to wine. Now we'll stir it in. Now we've moved our second pot full over here to the sink to cool it down. We've got our thermometer in there so we can see, what the temperature is. We'd like to see 75. We've dumped our second batch here in the primary. Now we've got the pot back on the stove and another jar ready to be poured in. So let's do that. And away we go. And as much of that drip in as possible. So again, we add our teaspoon of yeast nutrient. And then we stir it in. Get everything mixed up, melted together, all the above. Here's our third pot in the ice bath, waiting to cool down to 75, and when it does, we'll pour it into the primary. We look into our primary at our hydrometer, and it's a little bit short of where we want to be, so we're going to have to add some sugar to the mix. Alright, so we're over here. We got our measuring cup out. We add a little over 2 cups of sugar for a pound because we need to add a pound of sugar to our mixture to get it up to the percentage we wanted. We'll pour this in and we'll check our hydrometer again, and we should be to a point we can start getting our yeast ready. Okay, now that we've added our sugar, we're going to stir it up. We're going to do a yeast starter here. We're using that EC1118, which is a champagne type yeast. Put a little bit of water in a cup. Yeah, they say about 100 degrees, so warm water. And we'll add the yeast to that, and we'll let it sit for a while. Then we'll start adding some juice. So here we go. Adding our yeast in. This will get it rehydrated. Let it in and let it sit for a while. We'll put a napkin over it to kind of keep stuff out. We'll let it sit there a little bit. We see it kind of raining down. It's the yeast process starting. Now what we're making here is called a yeast starter. We've hydrated it with some water. Now we've scooped some juice out of the primary. We're going to pour some of that in the glass. Give the yeast something to start eating on and get used to our mixture. There, now we've poured it in. Left some room on top because we'll come back here in a little bit and put some more in there. We'll just let that set and let the yeast start doing its thing. As we see the yeast falling here in the cup, we're going to see at the bottom what I call a yeast volcano as it expands and kind of spews forward yeast cells toward the top. Then they'll settle down again and explode again. Hopefully we'll be able to catch one of these explosions. Oh, there was one, but not on our side. Well, we saw the results of it. We'll wait here and see if we see another one. Here we see the result of another one. The cloud of yeast coming around. There's some more of those yeast explosions. More yeast are being born, and looks like they're liking it. Stirred it. And we'll put the napkin on it and give it some more time. Okay, 2 hours later we're back. We poured it into a larger jar, added some more juice. At this point the yeast have doubled in numbers, and we'll let it sit in here for a while before we pour it in the primary. Just let that yeast keep building up, and then when it goes into the 5 gallons it'll do real good. It's been several hours since we've started our yeast starter here. We're ready to pour it into our must. That's the mixture of maple syrup and water and some yeast nutrient we put together. It's called must. It's time for us to pitch our yeast. So we'll pour it slowly around the top. Swish it around, get it all. Here we go. We've pitched our yeast into the must. And now we're starting to make our wine. We're back here the next day. It's been 7 hours, and we're going to take a look at our must and see how it's doing. So we got the lid off. We're looking into the primary fermenter, and we see a lot of foam. That's a good thing. That means our yeast is doing its thing. For only 7 hours, having that in there, that's almost amazing. Tonight we'll come back and we'll stir it up and add a little bit of air to it. Alright, we've come back a day later. We open the lid, we look down and we see foam. That's a good thing. We know our yeast is working. They also call it a cap. So we have to stir it every day. They call this punching down the cap. Sometimes you'll get bad stuff on top on the cap, and by doing this it'll drown it and not be an issue. Also, it gives it air. The yeast needs some air. Now, in the beginning process, air. After a while, we'll shut off the air and go from there. But we'll talk about that when the time comes. Right now, we're stirring it to punch down the cap and give it air. We're going to take a quick look at this hydrometer. We can get... Okay, it looks like it's giving us a reading about an 8. And we want it to get down to a 3 or 4 before we do anything different. And that's on the alcohol scale. Alright, enough for tonight. We're back for day 2. It's time to punch the cap down again. So we're going to stir it up here. Stir the foam down. Put some air into it. We know our yeast is working good because of all the foam. And what the foam is yeast burps. As the yeast eat the sugar, they burp up the bubbles. So let's see here. Let's give this thing a heck of a stirring. Reach all the way down to the bottom. Come back up. We want to get a little bit of air into it. The yeast need a little bit of air. The bubbles have kind of settled down after we punched the cap down. We're going to take a look at our hydrometer, get an idea of where we're at. We're going to use the alcohol scale. Looks like a 7. A couple more days. So we're going to let that drop down to about a 3 or 4. Then we'll rack it, which means we'll siphon it off with a tube into another container. So that'll do it for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow. We're back here on day 3. Open up the vat. Check out. Looks pretty good. Got bubbles all around. A lot of foam. We're going to punch down the cap again and stir some air in. Boy, the bubbles really came up. Now we'll let that sit a moment or two, let the bubbles pop, and we'll try to get a hydrometer reading. We'll grab our hydrometer and get in there. Now someone might say, oh, it's not real accurate. Well, for what we're doing, it doesn't have to be. All right, I'm looking at the alcohol scale. It looks like a 6. So I'm happy with the 6, and as each day it'll drop more. It's day 4. We're coming back to stir again. See a lot of foam. That's good. Stir this up real good. This is probably going to be our last day of stirring. And tomorrow we'll rack it into a carboy. We'll let the bubbles pop and take a look at the hydrometer. We got a little opening here in the bubbles. So let's take and see what our reading's going to be. It looks like about a 4 or 5. So I'm sure tomorrow we'll be racking this into a bigger carboy. Here we are, day 5. We're going to check our hydrometer, and the way it looks, we expect it. And the way it looks, we're going to be racking tonight. So it's down to like a 2 or a 3, so it's definitely ready. We're going to rack this wine into a carboy. We have a 6-gallon carboy and 5 gallons of liquid here. We want the extra headroom in case it bubbles up, it won't bubble over. Now we take the other end of our hose, get it started. Hear it going in. Now we'll siphon all the fermenter into our secondary. As we siphon this, we have the the tubing at the top because we want it to fall into the air and pick up air. This is the last oxygen that the yeast is going to get. It'll eat the rest of the sugar and die off here. We'll leave it in this carboy for a month. By that time the yeast should be done, and we'll rack it over again, leaving all the remains behind. We'll let it sit there for a couple more months before we bottle it. Let it get some age. We rack the wine from the primary into the secondary. At this point it is wine, not must anymore. We'll let it set in the secondary for a month, and then we'll rack it again. Then we'll give it a couple more months on that before we bottle it. Okay, we're back. It's been a month. Now we're going to do our second racking. Now all the yeast should be dead and it fall into the bottom, so we're going to rack the wine off of that. And at this point it is wine. Then we're going to move the container down in the cellar. The biggest reason for moving it into the cellar is the cellar temperatures. Vinegar, which eats wine to make vinegar, likes the same temperatures you do. That's 70, 75 degree mark. Where down in the cellar it's too cold for them, they won't reproduce like they would in this warm environment. We're going to start on our racking. It's the maple syrup wine. Here we are with our two jugs. The one on the bottom is 5 gallons and one on top is 6. So we're going to take what's in that 6 and put it in the 5 and fill it up all the way before we stick it down the cellar. As we look down into the 6-gallon carboy, we see very few bubbles. Pretty much all the yeast has died off and has fallen to the bottom. So we're going to take this nice wine that's sitting on top and rack it over. Now it is wine at this point, it just has to age some. Here we've started. We have the hose all the way down to the bottom. Last time it was at the top to give it air. This time we have it all the way down to the bottom so it won't get any air. So it'll just take, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes for this to siphon out. Here we're looking through the wine. We can see the basket on the other side. It's that clear, going through that much wine. That's a sign of it being done. We can see the wine in the 6-gallon container. The container on top has really dropped down. As we look down at the jug that we're filling up, we can see it's getting fuller and fuller. As we look into the carboy that we racked all the wine out of, we can see this pink layer on the bottom. Let me try and look in the opening. That's all the dead yeast, poop from the yeast and whatnot that has settled out of the wine. So we'll wash that out and end up with a clean jug. See you next time.